John Parker's field was more than just a patch of earth. It was his refuge, a sprawling swath of wildflowers, tall grasses, and stubborn weeds that danced freely under the sun. Nestled on the edge of Willow Creek estates, the manicured lawns, and identical townhouses of the HOA-governed neighborhood stopped abruptly where John's untamed sanctuary began. For years, John had resisted the pressure to conform. While neighbors mowed their lawns weekly and trimmed every shrub to perfection, John let nature grow as it pleased. The field was his connection to the land he loved, a patch of wildness in a world boxed in by rules and regulations. And no matter how strict the HOA grew, no one dared step onto his property. At least that's what he thought. It started with the noises, soft but persistent. The first night John heard it, he was sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset bleed orange across the horizon. A faint crunching sound came from the edge of the field. Curious, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the cooling evening air. But the light swept over nothing but his flowers, bent but unbroken. A false alarm? Maybe. Yet the next night, it happened again. And the night after that, louder this time. John's heart quickened. The sound wasn't just animals. It was deliberate. Boots crushing fragile stems. Tires rolling over the earth. Someone was trampling his field. The next morning, the evidence was undeniable. Footprints marred the soft soil, some fresh, others faded. Flattened wildflowers lay in ragged clumps, their petals bruised and torn. This was no random trespass by wandering deer or raccoons. This was human, methodical, and worst of all, repeated. He thought of the HOA, the faceless entity that governed Willow Creek estates with a stickler's iron fist. Their neighborhood handbook was full of demands for community standards and property upkeep. John had always ignored their letters. They didn't own his land, and he wasn't about to let them dictate how he nurtured it. But this was different. Someone had crossed the invisible line. Determined to catch the intruders, John spent the following days and nights watching. He set up motion-activated lights and even a weatherproof camera hidden in the brush. But each time the crew came, always. Early morning or late evening, they vanished before he could confront them. Only the tire tracks and broken plants were left behind as silent proof of their visit. At the next HOA meeting, John confronted the board. His voice was steady but laced with frustration. "My field is private property. Your maintenance crews have no right to be trampling through it every day." The board members exchanged cool glances. "Mr. Parker," the HOA president said, voice smooth and practiced, "we act in the interest of the community. That field borders common areas and must be maintained for safety and aesthetics." John's jaw tightened. "It's my land, and you're destroying it." "We suggest you reconsider your stance for the greater good," she replied, eyes sharp as knives. John left the meeting burning with anger, but also a creeping unease. This was no simple dispute about grass and flowers. Something deeper was at play. A silent battle over control. And he was on the losing side. That night, as the neighborhood lights blinked out one by one, John sat alone by his field. The air was heavy with tension, the scent of crushed blooms, lingering like a warning, and then from the darkness he heard it again, the unmistakable crunch of boots on grass. Someone was coming, and this time John was ready. The night air hung thick and still as John waited, breath shallow, heart pounding. Somewhere beyond the shadows, footsteps pressed into the earth, heavy and deliberate. The faint glow of his motion-activated lights flickered on, casting eerie pools of illumination across the crushed wildflowers. But the intruders didn't stop. John gripped the flashlight tighter, stepping off the porch into the darkness. The field that had once felt like sanctuary now seemed a minefield, each step threatening to reveal a new scar inflicted by unknown hands. He moved slowly, following the faintest crunch underfoot. Then a low rumble startled him, an engine idling just beyond the tree line. His heart thudded as he crept closer, the beam cutting through the night. A large mowing machine sat hidden in the shadows, its blades still but menacing. Nearby, indistinct. Shapes shifted. Two figures, dark and silent, their heads bent as if consulting a map or clipboard. John's blood ran cold. They weren't just trespassing, they were methodical, prepared, and likely backed by the HOA's silent approval. He swallowed his fear and stepped forward. "Hey!" he called, voice firm but wary. The figures startled, scrambling to shut off the mower. One man turned, face obscured by a cap pulled low. "This is HOA property," he said gruffly. "We've got orders to maintain it." John took a deep breath. "This is my land. You're trespassing." The man's jaw tightened. "Community. Safety comes first. If you don't want us here, take it up with the board." John clenched his fists. "I already tried. They won't listen." The men exchanged a glance. Without another word, they packed up their gear and vanished into the dark, leaving behind the battered earth and broken blossoms. John stared at the damage, his sanctuary bleeding under the weight of boots and blades. But worse than the destruction was the silence that followed, the quiet acceptance that he was powerless. Days passed, and the invasions grew bolder. The mowing crews came earlier, their machines roaring like thunder through the still morning air. John's attempts to catch them were thwarted by careful timing and evasive routes. The cameras recorded nothing but shadows and indistinct shapes. The neighborhood seemed oblivious, residents greeting one another with forced smiles and polite nods, as if unaware of the battle unfolding at the edge of their manicured lawns. John's frustration spiraled into anger. He posted no trespassing signs, built a low fence from scavenged wood, hoping the simple barriers would be enough to deter the daily assaults on his field. But each morning revealed new damage. Fence posts, broken, signs torn down, grass flattened as if by a storm. A creeping suspicion settled over him. This wasn't just an HOA maintenance routine, it was an invasion. Someone wanted his field gone, trampled underfoot and erased. One evening, as he sat by his porch, John noticed something unsettling, a fresh set of tire tracks leading away, from his field toward the far end of the neighborhood. They were too wide for a mower, deeper and heavier, like a truck or utility vehicle. His mind raced. What were they hauling? What were they planning? John's phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Lisa, popped up. "Hey, John, saw some strange activity near your place today. Looks like they're trying to dig something up." His blood ran cold. The stakes were rising, and the quiet war over his land was about to turn ugly. He decided then he needed more than signs and fences. He needed a plan. And most of all, he needed a warning. Something that would stop the invaders before his sanctuary was lost forever. But what kind of warning would be loud enough to make them think twice? John's hands trembled as he dialed the HOA office number again. The recorded voice that answered was polite but sterile, an automated message directing him to submit complaints online. He bit his lip, staring out at the ravaged field, where wildflowers bowed under unseen forces and his fence lay half torn apart. Frustration gnawed at him like a persistent storm. He had tried reason, patience, even diplomacy, but the HOA was an unyielding monolith, deaf to his pleas. More than that, they seemed to be watching, waiting for him to give up. Determined, John showed up at the next HOA board meeting, a monthly affair held in a cramped community center. He arrived early, notes in hand, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and defiance. The room was packed with familiar faces, neighbors who smiled politely but avoided eye contact, trustees in suits and skirts who held the gavel of power firmly in their hands. When his name was called, John stood, voice steady despite the knot in his throat. "My field is private property," he declared. Your maintenance crews have no right to trample it. The fence is torn down almost every day, and my signs disappear overnight. I want this to stop." A murmur rippled through the room. The HOA president, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen, leaned forward. "Mr. Parker," she said smoothly, "we appreciate your passion, but the community standards apply to all properties adjacent to common areas. Your field is considered a safety hazard." John's jaw clenched. "Safety hazard. It's a wildflower field. The danger is your crews destroying it." Karen's smile thinned. "We have regulations. You may not like them, but they're for the benefit of all residents." John's voice rose slightly. "Benefit or control? You're bullying me out of my own land." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Several neighbors exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others looking away. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Parker, I must remind you that the HOA has the authority to enforce compliance. Continued refusal may result in fines or legal action." John's heart pounded louder, but he refused to back down. "You're trampling my rights along with my field. This ends now." The meeting ended shortly after, with no resolution but plenty of cold stares and veiled warnings. Outside, John was met with silence. The friendly smiles of neighbors turned distant and guarded. Whispers followed him down the street, questions about his problem with the HOA and why he couldn't. Just follow the rules. It felt like the entire community was closing ranks, siding with the faceless board rather than the man fighting to protect his sanctuary. That night, John walked his field alone, flashlights scanning the trampled ground. He noticed fresh tire, marks cutting deeper than before. The soil churned as if heavy machinery had been through. Then he saw it, an ominous sign staked into the earth near the boundary line. Painted in harsh black letters was a warning: "Property under HOA control, unauthorized access prohibited." Someone had been here, deliberately marking his land as theirs. The realization hit John hard. This wasn't a simple maintenance disagreement anymore. It was a calculated move to assert ownership, to intimidate him into surrender. He wondered who had planted the sign: a board member, a maintenance foreman, or worse, someone in the neighborhood who had turned against him. That night, sleep evaded him. His mind spun with questions and fears. If the HOA was willing to cross every line to take his field, what was their end game? And how far would they go? John's quiet refuge was no longer safe. The war had escalated, and the next move would need to be decisive. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone anymore, but allies were scarce, and trust even scarcer. The stakes had never been higher. John woke before dawn, the cold bite of morning, air biting at his skin as he pulled on his jacket. The field lay shrouded in mist, each blade of grass dripping with dew like tiny jewels. Despite the fragile beauty of the scene, John's heart was heavy with dread. Last night's ominous sign still haunted him: property under HOA control. It was a declaration of war. He stepped outside, determined to bolster his defenses. If words hadn't stopped the HOA, maybe barriers would. Over the past week, he had collected scrap wood and old fencing from a nearby construction site. Now, with worn gloves and a hammer, he began erecting a low fence along the boundary, hoping it would send a clear message. This was his land, not theirs. As the sun climbed higher, John stood back to admire his work. The fence was simple but sturdy enough to slow intruders. He nailed up new "no trespassing" signs, bold and unambiguous, warning that the field was private property protected by law. For a moment, a glimmer of hope flickered. Maybe this time, the message would stick. But that hope was shattered just hours later. John returned from a quick run into town to find his fence battered and broken in several places. The signs were ripped down, scattered in the mud like defeated flags. Deep tire tracks crisscrossed the ground where the fence once stood, slicing through the wildflowers like scars. His throat tightened, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a clear, deliberate challenge. Someone wanted him off the field, and they weren't afraid to make it known. John's first thought was the HOA crews. But the neatness of the destruction felt too intentional, too calculated. This was no careless accident. It was a message of intimidation, a warning shot fired in the war for his land. He called Lisa, his closest neighbor, and one of the few people who had shown any sympathy for his plight. "Lisa, someone tore down my fence again. And those signs, they're gone," he said, voice tight. There was a pause on the other end. "John, I've seen some of the HOA board members out near your place late at night. They're serious about this?" John swallowed hard. "I'm starting to think this isn't just about community rules." "No, it's not," Lisa said softly. "I think they want to take your field. Plain and simple." The thought sent a shiver down John's spine. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like stepping off a cliff into uncertainty. That night, John stayed vigilant. He sat by the porch with a flashlight and binoculars, eyes darting over the shadowed edges of his property. Around, midnight, distant headlights flickered through the trees. A truck rolled slowly toward the field, its engine a low growl in the silence. John's pulse quickened. He crept closer, careful to stay hidden. The truck stopped, and two figures climbed out, silhouetted against the headlights. They carried tools, shovels, chainsaws, something larger that John couldn't quite identify. A chill ran down his spine. These weren't maintenance workers. This was something else. John debated calling the police, but the figures moved quickly, clearing brush and marking trees with fluorescent spray paint. The air was thick with tension. This wasn't a peaceful cleanup, it was preparation. He watched helplessly as the intruders vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of their intent. By morning, John knew one thing. His field was no longer just a refuge. It was a battleground, and if he wanted to keep it, he needed more than signs and fences. He needed a warning loud enough to stop whoever was coming next. John's mind raced as dawn broke over the battered field. The recent destruction was no accident. It was a declaration, a bold step toward taking what was his. The creeping fear that had settled deep in his gut demanded action. He needed a guardian, something stronger than signs or fences. That afternoon, John drove the winding country roads to a nearby farm, a place he hadn't visited in years. Brutus waited in the dusty barn, a massive bull with broad shoulders, deep brown eyes, and a temperament as fierce as his stature suggested. Brutus wasn't just any bull. He was John's old companion from his childhood, a creature respected and feared in equal measure by everyone in town. John hadn't planned to bring Brutus back into his life, but desperation pushed him forward. When he arrived, the farmer nodded knowingly. "You're planning to send a message," John grunted. "I'm planning to protect what's mine." Brutus was loaded carefully onto a trailer, his heavy breathing echoing in the confined space. John felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Brutus was intimidating, yes, but would he be enough? Back home, John led Brutus to the edge of the field, near the broken fence posts. The bull's nostrils flared as he sniffed the air, muscles tensing as if sensing the invisible threat looming over the land. Neighbors watched from a distance, whispering. The news spread fast. John had brought in a bull. That evening, John stood beside Brutus as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the wildflowers. The field felt different now, guarded, alive with a new kind of energy. But peace was short-lived. 2 nights later, the sharp crunch of footsteps shattered the stillness. John grabbed a flashlight and raced outside, Brutus close behind. Through the beam, he spotted a group of men moving cautiously through the field. John's voice boomed, "Stop! You're trespassing!" The intruders froze, but one stepped forward, sneering. "That bull of yours won't scare us off." Brutus snorted, low and menacing, muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. Without warning, the bull charged. Panic erupted among the men as they scattered, some tripping over the uneven ground. John's heart thundered as Brutus thundered. After them, a living warning no one could ignore. The next day, word had spread like wildfire. The HOA sent a strongly worded letter demanding John remove Brutus immediately, claiming he posed a danger to residents and violated community safety rules. John stood firm, his voice steady as he replied, "Brutus is protecting what's mine. If the HOA wants a fight, they'll get one." Tensions escalated as neighbors took sides. Some admired John's resolve. Others feared the bull and whispered about legal action and animal control. But John knew Brutus was more than muscle. He was the last line of defense for a man who refused to surrender. And as the standoff grew fiercer, John realized the battle for his field was far from over. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across John's field. The air was thick with tension. The kind that settles when everyone knows a storm is coming, but no one dares to speak of it openly. John paced near the edge of the field, Brutus grazing calmly nearby, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his mind. For weeks, the standoff between him and the HOA had grown fiercer, drawing curious neighbors and local gossip. Despite the warnings and threats, the HOA crews had not stopped their daily intrusions. Their vehicles prowled closer each day, their presence a silent challenge to John's defiance. That afternoon, John's worst fears came to life. He spotted a crew of maintenance workers approaching, armed with chainsaws, hedge trimmers, and heavy equipment. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the terrain as if on a mission. John's heart pounded in his chest. "Brutus, stay close," he muttered, stepping forward to confront them. "Hey," he called out, voice firm but cautious. "This is private property. You need to leave." One of the men, a burly figure with a faded baseball cap, smirked. "We've got orders to clear this area. HOA says it's a safety risk." John shook his head. "You're destroying my field. This isn't safe. It's sacred." The men exchanged amused glances, dismissing his words. Then, without warning, one of the workers stepped past the boundary line, boots crushing the tall grasses. Brutus stiffened, nostrils flaring. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within. His chest. "Back off!" John shouted, moving between the bull and the intruders. The worker laughed, taking another step forward. In a heartbeat, Brutus charged. The field exploded into chaos. Men shouted and scrambled as the bull thundered toward them, horns lowered and muscles coiled like springs. One worker tripped, sprawling into the dirt. Another barely dodged a crushing blow. John's voice rang out, commanding and urgent. "Brutus, stop!" The bull hesitated for a moment, then backed off, his eyes still blazing with fierce protectiveness. Silence fell over the field, broken only by heavy breathing and distant sirens. Someone had called the police. Within minutes, a squad car rolled up, blue lights flashing. Officers stepped out cautiously, assessing the scene. John explained the situation, emphasizing his rights as a property owner and the need to protect his land. The officers listened, then turned to the HOA crew, issuing warnings about trespassing and potential injuries. For the first time in weeks, the invaders retreated. Word of the clash spread quickly through the neighborhood, stirring heated debates. Some praised John's bravery and his bond with Brutus, admiring his willingness to stand firm against the HOA's encroachment. Others condemned the bull as dangerous, questioning John's responsibility and the risk posed to residents. Amid the swirling opinions, John remained resolute. He knew this was just the beginning. Behind closed doors, the HOA board convened emergency meetings, strategizing how to regain control and quiet the growing resistance. John sensed the pressure mounting, realizing the conflict was escalating beyond a simple property dispute. The stakes were higher now, far higher, and the next move could change everything. After the clash, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation and gossip. John's stand had made headlines in local news, drawing attention from beyond the quiet cul-de-sacs and manicured lawns. Some neighbors admired him, others whispered about the dangerous bull and the troublemaker on the hill. John knew the HOA wasn't going to back down. They were relentless, determined to break him by any means necessary. But the bull had given him something they couldn't crush, a symbol of resistance. Still, John felt isolated. Support was scarce, and legal battles loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Then, unexpectedly, a knock came at his door. It was Mr. Thompson, an elderly man from 2 streets over, a retired lawyer who rarely spoke, but was respected for his sharp mind and unwavering sense of justice. "I've been following your situation," Mr. Thompson said quietly, eyes steady, "and I think you need help." John hesitated. "What kind of help?" "Legal help," Mr. Thompson replied. "The HOA's tactics are borderline harassment. I've dealt with similar cases. You have rights, real rights, but you need to fight smarter." John's heart lifted for the first time in weeks. "I'm listening." Over the next few days, Mr. Thompson pored over documents, HOA bylaws, property deeds, and municipal codes. He identified loopholes, vague language the board had exploited, and potential violations of John's property rights. Together, they began drafting a formal complaint outlining the illegal trespassing, property damage, and intimidation tactics. They prepared to file it with the county. Meanwhile, John doubled down on his efforts to protect the field. He and Brutus became fixtures at community events, greeting neighbors and sharing his story, not as a defiant rebel, but as a man fighting to preserve his home. Slowly, the tide began to shift. Neighbors who had once kept silent started asking questions. Some even offered quiet support. A few came forward with their own stories of HOA overreach, validating John's experience. John realized he was not alone. But the board wasn't blind to the change. They intensified their pressure, sending letters demanding Brutus be removed, threatening fines and legal action. The community's mood grew tense, the lines between friend and foe blurring. Then, one evening, as John and Mr. Thompson sat reviewing their latest documents, the lights flickered and went out. The power cut was sudden and unexplained. Outside, shadows moved silently along the property line. John's stomach tightened. Brutus growled low, stepping protectively in front of John. The quiet was broken by the faint sound of footsteps. John grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, heart hammering. 2 figures approached, their faces hidden, in the dark. "We're not done," a voice hissed. John's grip tightened on the flashlight. "Neither am I." The night crackled with unseen threats, and John knew the battle for his field was about to reach its most dangerous chapter yet. The darkness pressed in thick around John as he faced the 2 shadowy figures on his property. Brutus stood at his side, muscles tense, eyes gleaming like molten steel in the flashlight's beam. "We're not done," the taller figure repeated, voice low and threatening. John's jaw tightened. "Neither am I." The night was heavy with a silence that felt charged, every second stretched taut with danger. Suddenly, a 3rd figure appeared from the shadows, a woman, sharp-eyed and composed. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Enough." John blinked, surprised. The woman wore a crisp blazer with the HOA emblem pinned to her lapel. But something was different about her. There was no malice in her eyes, only a hard-won resolve. "I'm Rachel, new to the HOA board," she said firmly, "and I'm here to put a stop to this madness." The two men exchanged startled glances, stepping back. Rachel continued, "I've been reviewing the complaints and your legal filings, John. The board's been overreaching, and frankly, some of their tactics are unacceptable." John stared, disbelief and cautious hope mingling. "I'm on your side," Rachel said. "But this fight isn't just about turf. It's about restoring trust and finding a way forward." The men grumbled and retreated into the night, leaving John and Brutus alone under the stars. Over the following weeks, Rachel worked quietly behind the scenes, rallying neighbors and fellow board members. She helped mediate discussions, pushing for compromises that respected both John's property rights and the community's concerns. In a surprising turn, the HOA agreed to officially recognize John's field as private property, protected from unauthorized maintenance or intrusion. Brutus was allowed to stay, so long as John maintained responsible care and safety measures. The wildflowers bloomed undisturbed once more. Neighbors, once divided, began to bridge the gap, united by the shared victory and newfound respect. John stood at the edge of his field one morning, sunlight filtering through the leaves, Brutus grazing peacefully beside him. He smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. The battle had been long and hard, but in the end, resilience and an unexpected ally had won the day. And John knew that sometimes even the fiercest fights could find peace in the most unlikely places.